Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says a judicial pushback to a draconian legal regime. The article here is speaking about Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. What is this act all about? What are the provisions in this particular act? Why were the activists arrested under this particular legislation? What did the Delhi High Court do? What was the judgment all about? How did it set a precedent which can become an example in the near future? All of this has been explained on 16th of June 2021. So we would not be discussing what is the UAPA, why is this judgment significant as we have already discussed. What is the discussion point for today's article? The article is primarily speaking about two legal systems as well. One is what is called as the adversarial system. The other legal system is what is called as inquisitorial system. Let us try and understand what are these legal systems that are present world over in different countries. First, let us understand what is the adversarial legal system. When it comes to the adversarial legal system, we have many parties that are involved. The first major difference that we have to understand is when it comes to the adversarial system, the judge is passive and the lawyers here or the advocates are active. But when it comes to inquisitorial system, the judges are active and the lawyers are kind of passive when it comes to this particular system. Let me explain this with the help of an example. An example for the adversarial system is Indian judicial system. How does the Indian judicial system work? We have the judges, we have the petitioner on one side, we also have the respondent on the other side. In case it is a criminal case, we will also have the prosecution, we will also have the defense as well. So what will the judge do? The judge will listen to the competing parties. So the competing parties will put out the evidences. These evidences will be put out right in front of the judge. The judge will listen to all the evidences put out by these advocates, and ultimately the judge will deliver the judgment in whose favor the evidence is favoring. So what is happening here? It is the advocates who are taking an active role. They get the evidence. They also get the number of people right in front of the judge as well. So they request the judge and plead in front of the judges and ultimately prove their viewpoint in front of the judges. So the judge here is actively listening, but he is passively involved. In this case, it is the advocates who are actively involved in contributing to the justice delivery system. So what happens here? Judge is only listening, so he is passively participant, and when it comes to the advocates, they are actively participating when it comes to the adversarial system. That is what is adversarial system. Now when it comes to the inquisitorial system, one of the examples that we can take is France. What exactly happens in this particular case? Yes, we will also have the judge, we will also have the petitioner side advocate, we will also have the respondent side advocate as well. But during this particular investigation process, the judge here can also put out questions, can be an active participant, can also say the advocate what to do. So what is he doing here? He is actively involving himself in that particular case to trigger the truth in the inquisitorial system. When it comes to the adversarial system, the judge is passive. He does not engage in the evidence collection, but when it comes to the judge, though he is not directly involved, he can trigger the particular advocate to find out what the truth is when it comes to that particular case. So an example of the inquisitorial system happens to be France. So what exactly happens under this? When it comes to the adversarial system, we have what is called as the precedent. What is this precedent? Let's say for example, there is the Supreme Court or there is a High Court. Let's say they have passed a judgment. This particular judgment will have to be followed by the lower courts. But when it comes to the inquisitorial system, it is completely independent. This means that the judges are free to decide each case independently. They need not have to comply by the previous decisions by applying relevant statutes as envisaged in that particular country. So in adversarial system, what we have is a precedent, that which is set by the higher judiciary, which has to be followed by the lower cases, but it is not the same when it comes to the inquisitorial system. They act independently, and on the basis of the statute, on the basis of the law in that particular country, they would be able to act independently each time a particular case comes up to the court of law. So what we have in an inquisitorial system is that the judges are completely independent to take an independent stand every single time, and they need not necessarily follow the president. They can follow as well, but when it comes to adversarial system, it is compulsory, but here it depends on the judge where he can also act independently as well. These are some of the differences when it comes to the legal systems called as adversarial system and the inquisitorial system. But for the rest of the analysis with respect to the UAPA, with respect to the judgment made by the Delhi High Court, kindly look into the 16 June 2021 analysis. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, should India accept Islamic State returnees? The article here is speaking about whether India has to accept those individuals who had gone to Syria, or they were representing ISIS. They have lost their dear ones. They are now captured by Afghan government, and the Afghan government is now asking whether they have to deport these individuals. So the question is, should India accept these ISIS returnees or not? What are we going to discuss? We will discuss on those arguments whether India has to accept it. We will look at arguments which says yes, India has to accept them. We will also look at arguments which says that India should not accept these returnees. But the background to this has been discussed on 12th of June 2021. Kindly look into it. Now let's look into arguments which says that yes, these ISIS returnees will have to be accepted by the Indian government. What are these arguments? We have one of the important articles in the Indian Constitution. Article 245 says, extent of laws made by Parliament and by the legislatures of the state. It says, no law made by Parliament shall be deemed to be invalid on the ground that it would have extraterritorial operation. Why am I discussing this? That is because we have one of the sections in the Indian Penal Code, which is section 3. What is this section all about? Let's say there is an Indian citizen. This Indian citizen has gone to another country, let's say United Kingdom, or let's say Syria in the present case. So what this individual has done, who is an Indian citizen, has committed a crime which, if committed in a foreign soil, the same can be punished under Indian laws. Let me give you an example. Let's say there is an Indian citizen, he's committed an act of theft, or he's committed an act of murder, let's say in Syria. Let's not assume that he is an ISIS individual or not. Let's assume a common scenario. If this particular person has committed a murder which might not be a crime, let's say in Syria, as of now, hypothetical situation, this person has committed a murder. So this particular person's crime is not a crime in Syria. Now he comes back to India, but in India it is a crime. So if this particular person has committed not a crime according to Syria, but a crime according to India, he will be culpable according to Indian Penal Code, which is section 3. Let me give you another example. Adultery is decriminalized by the Indian Supreme Court. This was not decriminalized, let's say about 3 to 4 years back. An individual who travels to United Kingdom engages in an adultery relationship. So if that individual is not prosecuted in United Kingdom, but a case has been filed in India, if that Indian citizen comes back to India, he could have been booked under adultery. As of now it is decriminalized, but taking it back to 4 to 5 years, if this person comes back to India, he can be booked under charges of adultery in the Indian Penal Code. So what is the section 3 speaking about? The section 3 of the Indian Penal Code says that if there is a person who's conducted an activity which is illegal in nature in the foreign soil, and if that particular person comes back to India, whatever punishment is accorded for that illegal crime or the illegal activity, such a punishment will be given according to laws in India. That is what is section 3 of the Indian Penal Code. Why am I discussing this? That is because individuals have gone to Syria, they have contributed to the visions of the ISIS, and that is why if it is a crime according to Indian law books, they should be got back to the Indian system and they should be penalized and punished according to Indian laws. So what should we do? We should ask Afghanistan government, who are currently detaining these individuals, to deport them into India so that these people can face the law of India. So if they have committed a crime, whatever the law says, that should be imposed on such individuals. So the first argument says, yes, these ISIS returnees should be given back to India so that the law of the land takes the precedent and these people are prosecuted according to laws of the land. The second argument says that these people, if they come back to India, they could become threat to India's security. This is where the author goes on to question it. Why? That is because the minute they come to India, they should not be allowed to move out. So where will they be? They'll be in the prisons, they'll be in the jails. So how can they be threat to the Indian society is the second question. So the author questions this whole narrative that they can be threat to the security of India, because the minute they are deported, they are taken by the police services or in fact by the armed forces, and ultimately they are put behind bars. So how can they be threat to the society is the second question. Since they are taken away by the police officials, since they'll not be a security threat, they should be allowed to come back to India is the second argument. The third argument is in reference to the children. There are couples who have gone to Syria. In Syria, the husband might have fought for the ISIS. He is no more, he's passed away. What we have is the women along with the child. The women is behind the bars as well. If this particular woman and the child is brought back to India, the child of this particular couple can be in the safe hands of the grandparents, because the children do not know what their parents were up to, what were the vision of their parents, what the parents did. It is ultimately meaning the children have no role to play. So the children will have to be taken to a safe place if the grandparents are present, if their relatives are present. If they can take care of the child and the children, why should the children be prosecuted or should pay the penalty for the mistake of the parents? Since there are children of these ISIS returnees, the ISIS returnees should be prosecuted for their crime, but the children should be given to the grandparents so they should be allowed to come back to India is the third argument. The fourth is in reference to Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. India is one of the country which believes in international order. India is also signatory to these Universal Declaration of Human Rights and International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Being a signatory to these rights, it says that no person can be stateless. So it means as of now, these people are assumed to be stateless, which is why India, being a signatory to these international conventions, should accept these people who are now stateless, should be given what is called as the initial citizenship, and ultimately they should be able to pay for their sins, but they should be accepted by India is the fourth argument. So all these arguments says that yes, these people will have to be accepted by India, but whatever is the penal provision as present under the laws of the land, such should be imposed on these people. These are one set of arguments. Another major argument that we have to remember is that when it comes to the Afghan government does not want these individuals. It is asking the government of India and other countries as well to accept these people as an important country where we have good bilateral relationship. It also puts responsibility on India to accept this particular proposal given by the Afghan government. So these are some of the arguments. Now let us look at arguments which says that these people should not be accepted by India. ISIS is long losing its territory in Syria and Iraq. These people who had once captured large swathes of land in Iraq, Syria and in multiple countries are now losing their hold in these countries. So these people who are ISIS returnees, in case they go back to the home country, they may start igniting passions in the home country. These operatives are trained well when it comes to terrorism. They might also ignite passions, and they may also conduct lone wolf attacks as well. They are so radicalized that these people can still conduct lone wolf attacks, which ultimately means it is the people of the home country who will be the major sufferers. One such example is, we have the example of Paris attack. In Paris attack, it was one of the ISIS returnee. Since the police officers and the security agencies were not able to keep a track of these individuals, it meant these individuals escaped, and ultimately Paris attack took place in France. So all this means that we should not be accepting such individuals when it comes to India. Added to this, we did discuss that initially, that when they are accepted, they are put behind bars. So this will not be a security threat to the society. But what if once they head to the prison, what if they are indoctrinating other individuals in the prison? So the minute they head to the prison, what if they meet the jailmates? What if they ask the jailmates, convince them, radicalize them such that the minute that person who is behind bars comes out of the jail, ignites passions, and conducts a lone wolf attack because he is radicalized by that ISIS returnee? This could also spell a bound of disaster, says the author. So what we have to ensure is that this particular person is completely de-radicalized. So the fall of the IS Caliphate may have ended the territorial battle against the terror network, but what we cannot downplay is that such people can still be a threat to the Indian security agencies. So the government going forward as of now is looking on a case to case basis, but it has to come up with a policy initiative where this policy lays out some of the fundamental guidelines, so this can be used as a future course of action. As of now, everything is being taken on a case to case basis. We do not have a clear structure and the framework. So if the government can come up with a policy initiative, at least giving a broader framework, the security agencies, the government, and other operational agencies and institutions would be able to manage it. But all that India has to do is to manage this in the frame of international order, is what we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, a place for disruptive technology in India's health sector. The article here is speaking about healthcare workers and how they can be protected by employing the technology. When it comes to the COVID-19, the people who have been safeguarding us primarily are the healthcare workers. In spite of the use of the PPE kit, in spite of taking all precautionary measures, there have been number of examples where these healthcare workers have lost their lives. In order to overcome this particular issue, in order to reduce the negative impact, in order to make sure that we do not lose the healthcare personnel, what this article is primarily speaking about is use of technology when it comes to the healthcare sector. So employing the technology in order to minimize the loss to the healthcare workers is what is this article all about. Basically, the article comes up with number of suggestions. It gives us number of examples. These illustrative examples is what needs to be followed, says this article. First up, it says that we have to make use of autonomous systems in the healthcare. What are these autonomous systems? Basically, when we are using machine learning, mathematical modeling to develop next generation of technology, that is using of robots, that is what is called as autonomous systems. So the autonomous systems will make use of advanced technologies. It will make use of technologies where the human interference is barely minimal. Most of these works are being conducted by the robots. There are reports in the global media of innovative field hospitals using robots. There are hospitals in China which have made use of 5G powered temperature measurement devices. Instead of people checking the temperatures, these robots have checked the temperatures, found out if they have fever or not, what were their temperatures, and on the basis of symptoms has also given clarification whether the person is suffering from fever or not. So the robots are employed in such a situation, and that is what is called as the autonomous systems in healthcare. The robots have also been used to measure heart rates, blood oxygen levels through smart bracelets as well as rings. So if the PPE kit is not working out, if in spite of using the PPE kits, we are losing our healthcare workers in such a situation, what we can make use of is the robots so that we can minimize the number of deaths when it comes to the healthcare workers. In fact, these robots can also be used to deliver food to the COVID-19 patients. They can also be used to deliver other basic essentials as well, and even the medicines can be delivered with the use of these robots. So the first important factor that the article speaks about is employing the robots, which is called as the autonomous system in the healthcare. The article speaks as an example introducing the blockchain technology. What is this blockchain technology's application? When it comes to the blockchain, it has a wide range of application and uses in the healthcare system. The ledger technology can be used for the security of the medical data. The blockchain technology can be used to manage the medicine supply chain as well. So the article says this blockchain technology will help in maintaining the integrity of data with no compromise when it comes to the medical data of the patient, and at the same time where that particular drug is, how is that drug being delivered, can all be monitored by the supply chain using the blockchain technology, says this article. Further, the article speaks about effective use of Internet of Medical Things. This broadly has the medical device. It makes use of applications and the networking, that is the internet technology. How does this work? Let's say there is a wearable or a kind of a medical device which is like a wristband. This is worn by the patient. So what will this wristband or that particular wearable will do? It will collect all the information from that particular patient. It will be integrated to the application, and this will be passed over on the internet to the doctors. So the doctors will be in a much better position where they would be able to see what is happening with respect to the patient by using the wearables, which is able to monitor constantly using the application, and the data is sent via the internet. This is what is Internet of Medical Things. Followed by this, the article goes on to suggest we have to ensure that there is basic universal health coverage. As of now, because we are not making use of the effective technology, many of the people are excluded from the health coverage. So making use of the technology where every person is inclusive in this health model is the fundamental objective of the universal health coverage. We have to ensure that when healthcare personnel are appointed to a particular designation, if they can make use of the local knowledge in that particular place. So making use of local knowledge along with the technology updation will also help in mitigating the impact of healthcare losses. Finally, there are also challenges when it comes to the execution. What are these challenges? Let's say, for example, if we have to implement the Internet of Medical Things, this will also require a large amount of investment as well. So the cost would be exorbitant, and at the same time, many people would not be able to afford as well. So affordability and cost is the major problem and the challenge. Added to this, the standardization of the health data. So what is present in one state, in one region, may not have a similar replica in another region. So what we require is a standardization process, which is currently a problem, and that happens to be a major problem. Then we have to ensure that the data is secure as well. So security becomes very important, and we should not also compromise on the privacy of an individual. All this needs to be taken care. So these are some of the challenges when it comes to employing technology in the healthcare sector. So going forward, yes, the technology will be disruptive and it will play a major role when it comes to the health sector. But if we are able to accomplish and safeguard all this, this could help in minimizing the losses to the healthcare workers, and we may not lose our dear and near ones, says this article. So going forward, use of technology is the need of the hour when it comes to stopping the menace of communicable diseases, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Juneteenth. What is it? This is a portmanteau of two words, that is June and 19th. On this day in June 19th, it marks the ending of slavery in the United States of America. This is also known as Emancipation Day. It is also known as Juneteenth Independence Day. And when we go back to the year 1863, we have the notable person Abraham Lincoln, who had signed what is called as the Emancipation Proclamation. This proclamation was signed to basically ensure that there was no racial discrimination and all the African Americans were free from the so-called racial discrimination. But this was not uniformly implemented across the length and breadth of United States of America. But in 1865, the Union soldiers brought the news of freedom to the enslaved black people in Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1865. From that day, it is being celebrated as what is called as Emancipation Day or Juneteenth Independence Day. So kindly remember, this is one of the day in United States of America for ending the slavery in USA. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. As India confronts the problem of ISIS returnees, should India accept them? Critically examine. Technology can play a critical role in transforming healthcare in India. Illustrate with examples. Please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.